reporting on Hindu issues, suppressing certain issues like the Degalunga riots. Anything Hindu has become communal in India, and anything minority suddenly becomes secular, and this is the dichotomy to be addressed.
What's your take on the perceived
I recognize that this is a widespread perception. I happen not to agree with it. I think that the mistake he makes is to presume that Hindutva stands for or represents all Hindus. I think it's definitely true that many educated English-speaking Indian elites, as Dr. Swamy alluded to, are more sympathetic to a kind of pluralism and secularism where people don't wear their religious identity on their sleeve necessarily. I think that is true, and I would say that among Indian elites across the board, whether it's in the media or in other fields of society, they would be dominant, and they have been dominant traditionally from the time of Nehru. That is not the same as saying that India is anti-Hindu. There are many ways of being a Hindu. And the presumption over here by that gentleman's comment is that the only authentic way of being a Hindu is believing in Hindutva. I think that is one authentic way. I don't have a problem with people who believe in that way necessarily. But this notion that there is this deep-seated bias against Hinduism is just rubbish. What is more interesting and is potentially debatable is there a bias against Hindu nationalism in the media? And there, I'd say, in the elite media, you would have many more voices who are opposed to Hindu nationalism and far fewer who support it. And that, I think, is an accurate statement.
Subramanian, I want to get back to you coming off the tail of that. We've got all these opposing viewpoints. Some of them are rather extreme. You've written some rather extreme things in your time, in a recent op-ed that you took quite a bit of heat for. But it brings up some interesting points, which is, where do you draw the line between nationalism, extreme nationalism, and fascism? Because when you're already dealing with groups who are to the extreme, it's almost like you're fanning the flames. How do you draw that line, and how do you keep control over what's going on?
Well, I don't know. The drawing of the line would be on what you would constitute what you think is India. If you think India is a continuing civilization of the Hindus as a dominant cultural civilization, and that you know for a fact now through modern science that all the people here are by and large, overwhelmingly of the same background, either they are Hindus or their ancestors have been Hindus. The question is that if you hold this view, it is considered an extreme view, because for almost 2 centuries, what has been taught is that India is not one country, but many countries welded into one by the British administrative system, which we reject. Now, that's been the conflict throughout. The moment you say India is a continuing civilization of the Hindus, and Hindutva doesn't mean you have to be a Hindu. It means Hindutva means Hindu-ness, which means a certain set of values where we, the way we treat our parents, where the way we behave with each other, the interpersonal relationships, the attitude to age, gender, a variety of things which are different from the West and other cultures, say even the Middle East. That's where the problem comes. The moment you differ from the view given to us, or from 200 years of what I would call as brainwashing through distorted history texts, that the moment you deviate from that, you become a fascist, you become an extremist, and so on. That's just arises. It doesn't arise.
Sure. I'd like to jump in. Dr. Swamy, I think
there is no violence advocated by any of our nationalists.
Let's let Sagarika jump in. Go ahead, Sagarika.
The thing is, in the words of Dr. Swamy, Hindutva is, in his vision, an intellectual force, the civilizational life force. It is about respect for elders. It's a social glue, all of that. Now, in his intellectual scheme, that may be the case. But when this message trickles down to the cadres and to the people on the street, it becomes a message of violence and hatred towards the other. Maybe they don't have the intellectual tools that Dr. Swamy has. They don't have the power of argument that Dr. Swamy has. The fact is, these very arguments, these very sophisticated arguments of cultural nationalism and and unfolding Hindu identity on the ground becomes simply a justification for riots on minorities.
Siddhant?
That's the basic problem.
I have a different. I also disagree with Dr. Swamy, but I have a different disagreement. I don't think it's fair to judge an intellectual argument based on what some lumpen element may or may not do with it. But I have a problem with the argument itself, which is that it's deeply undemocratic to try and tell somebody else that, well, you must think of yourself as having had Hindu, and may or may not be factually true. But if someone in a modern democracy does not want to acknowledge that ancestry, or wants to sort of seek identity in Islam or Christianity or in the West or in the Arab world or wherever, that's their personal affair. You cannot mandate that upon a citizen of your country, and that's what the problem. I mean, the problem really lies in its tension with a modern idea of individual rights, where that is your personal affair. It's no affair of the state, and it's no affair of politics. And you can't then say that if you don't acknowledge that your ancestors were Hindu, as Dr. Swamy has suggested, we'll take away your right to vote. That is an absurd and deeply illiberal position to hold.
Well, on that note, we'll give everyone a chance to respond to that. But I'd like to leave us with something for the post show.
Well, let me say...
I'm sorry, but Amr says on Twitter, Indian secularism is strong and vibrant thanks to largely tolerant Hindu majority. Internet Hindus don't represent the whole India. And of course, Dr. Swamy, I'll give you a chance to respond to that in the post show.
All right. On that note, everybody sit tight. We're going to continue this discussion in about 15 seconds in our online post show, and everybody will have a chance to respond. So just go right back in. Malika, hit us again with that tweet that you left us with a couple of minutes ago.
Yes, definitely. And Dr. Swamy, this is directed to you. Indian secularism is strong and vibrant thanks to a largely tolerant Hindu majority. Internet Hindus don't represent the whole of India. And I wonder if you can elaborate on that. In addition to, I know you wanted to respond to a point that was made earlier about stripping of voter rights. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you see, that itself makes the Hindu proud of himself, that it's because he's an overwhelming majority in India, that's why you have secularism. I think if India was an overwhelmingly Islamic majority, it won't have secularism. That's at least from the examples we have seen. We have seen majority Islam of Kashmir. What has happened to those 500,000 Hindus who were driven out and still living in refugee camps? The population of Hindus was 32% of Bangladesh. Today it's down to 7%. It's perhaps one of the largest religious cleansing that has taken place, but nobody talks about it. In the state of Kerala, a Christian professor set an exam paper on punctuation, where he lifted up an article from a newspaper, perhaps without thinking, where there were some critical comments about Islam. And what happened, the local Sharia court, which is illegal, but they nevertheless exist, they passed a judgment that both his hands should be cut off. So when that professor was going for a walk in Cochin, 4 boys came in and cut his hands off. Now, these are some of the demonstrations we see which affirms to us that it's because of the overwhelming Hindu majority of India that we are still secular, and therefore we want to safeguard that Hindu majority. In that context is what I have said, that we must recognize that the mainstream is Hindu, and after all, we partitioned India between those Muslims who couldn't bear to live with Hindus, and those who could stay. Now, it's not I alone, it is Dr. Ambedkar, there are so many other thinkers who have said very clearly that once partition takes place, it has to be explicitly clear that this minority-majority relationship must have some connection with India's past. That's what we are redefining. And I say, what is wrong if a Muslim acknowledges that what is the truth, what has been proved by the DNA, that his ancestors are Hindus.
Sagarika, I want to give you a chance to jump in here.
No, I just want to say that, it's all very well for us to say that Hindus want a voice and Hindus need to be heard. The fact is, discrimination against Muslims is a day-to-day reality in India. The Muslim community is one of the most backward communities in India. I know that they haven't been well served by the Congress's brand of vote bank politics and appeasement of the minorities, as Dr. Swamy would no doubt characterize it as. But, let's not run away from the reality of religious discrimination that exists. Of course, the Hindus are a majority. Of course, they're culturally assertive. Of course, the Hindu identity is dominant in the urban middle class. And nobody's saying we don't need the modern right-wing party. India does need a modern right-wing party. The difficulty is that India's cultural right embraces the economics of the left. The BJP increasingly does not embrace the free market and opposes free market reforms. That's a different story. What I'm saying is we do need a two-party system, a broadly left liberal party and a broadly right party, and those two need to exist, and there has to be constructive dialogue. My only point is that in a situation where discrimination is rife, where there is a lot of religious hatred, where there is a lot of religious intolerance growing increasingly, I think the time to assert Hinduism and to assert Hindu pride is not needed. Hindus are dominant. They are the majority. They have nothing to fear.
Well, Sudan, speaking of religious intolerance, I want to step away from politics and go back to the media for a second. There's a tweet here from Atirith, and if we can get a shot of my screen here. Atirith, of course, is a former producer for the stream. He says, India's liberal media is trigger-happy about Hindu fundamentalism, but unwilling to take on Islamic fanaticism. Would you agree with that?
I don't entirely agree with that. I do think that there's a form of, shall we say, politeness in India, which is that you don't criticize people outside of your own faith. And I think that form of politeness has been extended to the degree where people who are in fact not moderate are painted as moderate when they happen to be, when they're Muslim fundamentalists or Christian fundamentalists. A great example of that is the televangelist Zakir Naik, who's regularly feted as some kind of moderate when he's not. That said, my fundamental disagreement with Sagarika is that she characterizes the situation in India as much, much more dire than in fact it is. Is India imperfect? Yes. Could India do a better job of treating its minorities, particularly its Muslims? Yes, it could. But it's fundamentally a tolerant society. It is fundamentally a pluralistic society. It is fundamentally a society where people will go and cheer a movie star or allow a businessman to do well, or people rise to the highest level in all spheres of public life. Could it do better? Yes. Do I hope that it'll do better still in 20 years? Yes. But I think that Sagarika's characterization of it as a society that is deeply rife with all kinds of prejudice is, frankly, it sort of shows a blindness to what the reality of the rest of the world is.
Sagarika, if body language said it all, you'd be screaming.
Where is Anand living? I mean, he's living in the US. He should.
I come to India all the time, and I've seen a lot of other countries.
You're looking at a situation where Shabana Azmi and Javed Akhtar, household names in India, cannot find a flat in Mumbai.
Do you really think that, okay, let me step back. Do you think that India discriminates more against its minorities than any country in the region, in Asia? Name me a country with a better record than India.
I'm not saying that there isn't tolerance. I'm not saying
there's a ton of tolerance.
But let's accept that religious discrimination is a very serious issue here.
No one says it's not, but you have to have a benchmark.
Our lives, it's becoming, our societies are becoming segregated almost.
All right.
It's as bad as that. It's as bad as that. I think we really need to take a look inwards. You need to look at the exposes we've done on how Muslims are finding it difficult to find a place to live. Of course, there is growing tolerance as well. I'm not saying the picture is bleak. I'm not saying it's dire.
It seems to me that you painted a very bleak
We've got about 30 seconds left in the show. Subramanian, I want to give you the last word since you've been waiting patiently.
Let me say that a Hindu in Kashmir would find worse discrimination than the Muslim in the rest of India. So, I mean, I cannot deny that there is discrimination, But it's surprising that after 800 years of being a ruling class, the Muslims still find themselves poor and require state assistance to survive.
All right, and on that note, we're going to have to wrap up our discussion. I want to say thank you to Sadanand, Sagarika,